Chapter excerpt from the Second Texas Republic, read by the author, Joe B. The Battleship Texas. Sissy Patchett wasn't going to miss this for the world. She raced down the old Interstate Highway 37 to North Beach, outside of Corpus Christi, in her old Chevy pickup truck. The air conditioning did not work anymore. She burned a little oil from time to time. She didn't get good gas mileage, and her tires wore unevenly, giving a kind of a shimmy vibration at certain speeds. But the old workhorse refused to die. 1 year ago, on that very day, the nation of France offered to the fledgling new republic to refurbish the old aircraft carrier Lexington and the old battleship Texas as a gift to the new nation. Everyone knew there were unspoken contracts for oil, no doubt exchanged under the table, but the people by and large let these sorts of agreements slide. France had agreed to tow the old museum piece vessels to a harbor at Cherbourg for refitting, but Texas A&M boldly stepped forward, unannounced, into the public arena and published a boast that if the Republic could grant them additional funds, they could get the old battleship to run on her own steam again. The federal government agreed, and a fundraising effort began nationwide which lasted only 6 weeks before the goals were achieved. A dry dock was erected around the old battleship, and work began around the clock in shifts of volunteer engineering students and a lot of interested citizens. Almost 1,000 persons ended up employed in the endeavor, many working for free in many cases. 1 month into this restoration effort, Texas Tech University stunned the new nation by announcing it had secured funding on its own to ensure the aircraft carrier Lexington could sail on her own steam, and if allowed, the university boldly challenged Texas A&M that they would beat them in their task, freeing the Lexington from its mooring and conducting a sea trial before the battleship Texas was completed. Everyone in the new nation was talking about it. Texas Tech was given the green light, and they did not open their doors to the outside. There remained a close-knit group, reportedly 245 picked students and selected alumni, also working around the clock, but in complete secret. Almost 9 months had passed since Texas Tech had sealed off access to Lady Lex, as she was affectionately known, and welding lights, drilling, hammering, and other promising noises could be glimpsed and heard throughout the night in many areas of the seafront of Corpus Christi. The battleship Texas was reportedly complete, but they were having difficulty removing her from the dry dock and then her mooring. Dredges were behind schedule in opening the waterway, and the old ship was stuck. Yesterday they announced the battleship had been freed and was making her way through the new artificial canal dredged for her to the sea. The clock was ticking for Texas Tech. An announcement was to be made today, and Sissy Patchett, the editor for her high school newspaper in Victoria, Texas, had her photography editor with her in her truck, bounding towards North Beach, where her ex-boyfriend's stepfather had a beach house, from which, supposedly, a front row seat to the launching of the Lady Lex into the Gulf of Mexico could be had. The sun was blinding her as she flew into the morning sun. When she reached the beach house, it was more than she could have hoped for. Her ex-boyfriend was there, shouting to her from the balcony of the beach house. She parked abruptly and slammed the shifter into park, her feet hitting the gravel at almost the same instant. She tripped on the stairs twice, but was surprised to see her photography editor already switching lenses on his camera and propping up a tripod on the balcony. She realized he was shouting at her everything that he could see. She forgot her tablet and pencil back in the truck. She tried to repeat everything he said as she ran back to get her notebook. She paused at the truck and jotted a few notes, and then ran a little more carefully back up the stairs, pausing twice to write a few more sentences. There's a dark shape emerging, a bright shape next to it. Sissy grabbed her spotting scope out of her backpack. She used it to sight in her deer rifle, and it came in handy now. She propped it up on the rail of the balcony and peered through it. She then realized she forgot to greet her hosts. "Thank you all for letting us do all this." She heard a murmur and wondered how many people were on the balcony. All of these ancillary thoughts vanished like smoke in the wind when she saw through the scope. All there were now was herself and her photography editor shouting back and forth a few words at a time. She saw the French flag, the tricolor, flying high from a small escort vessel, escorting, yes, the battleship Texas. She felt a shiver from her neck to her spine as she saw the black smoke belching from the stacks of the aging gray shape and thought about the thousands of man-hours poured into the vessel by the volunteers. The blood, sweat, and tears of the new republic made that smoke, she thought. Texas A&M had won indeed. They were approaching the aircraft carrier, yet still moored to the island. She turned her scope to the aircraft carrier and saw the scaffold and curtains were dropping away. The ship did not look any different, but she saw lights and the water roiling around her. Her engines were turning. She heard a roar from thousands of distant voices and turned her scope to the superstructure above the flight deck. She saw a huge, huge Texas flag being unfurled. What was that sound? She heard music. There was a band on the deck of the ship. She could see activity. Her eyes were blurring from tears. She shouted at the photography editor to get everything, video and pictures. He shouted back, "I'm getting it all," and his voice cracked. He too was getting emotional. The Lady Lex was moving under her own power. She could hear it now. The Yellow Rose of Texas was being played. As the ship began to turn the loudspeakers on, the deck faced her beach house for a moment. They could just make it out. She could hear tens of thousands of voices in the distance, singing in unison with the music. She'd never heard anything like that before in her life. She would never hear anything like it again. Nobody that was there would, but they all carried that memory of what they saw and heard to the grave. She watched through her spotter scope, her notebook and pencil on the deck of the balcony, forgotten. The Lady Lex was making headway now towards the waiting battleship. It seemed like two lovers who'd been separated by decades were again united. Even the sailors aboard the French escort vessel reported becoming emotional at the sight of the two old ships sailing side by side. As the aircraft carrier began to close on the battleship, the Aggies from Texas A&M unfurled their own Texas flag. Some say it was bigger from the mast of their battleship. The wind caught the gigantic flags. Helicopters from television news agencies buzzed overhead. Sissy found herself humming the Yellow Rose quietly to herself as she watched. The two ships came close, and there was a kind of a pause. The French escort vessel could be seen making lazy circles around the two larger vessels. Reportedly, Texas A&M and Texas Tech were arguing over the radio about who was to follow who. According to reports published by the French frigate later, they negotiated the details of their voyage. Texas Tech would sail the aircraft carrier to France. Texas A&M the battleship. They would sail side by side. Both crews would be returned by airplane upon arrival. Many of them did not think to bring passports after all. Both crews would be replaced by Texas Navy personnel still in training at the naval facility on Galveston Island. They would receive 2 months of training on each vessel in France before the French government would release the ships back to the new republic. France would supply 8 recent but not brand new Mirage fighters for the new aircraft carrier, and England had pledged 6 Harrier jump jets. The Republic of Texas was in current negotiations to purchase helicopters for both the battleship and aircraft carrier, also from France. The ship sat at anchor while the French frigate negotiated details for several hours. Sissy jotted down notes and outlines, occasionally chatted with her hosts, and staring at the ships on the horizon from time to time. She realized her work for the day was mostly done. She would publish a great article, and it would be carried in 4 large Texas newspapers. She would later get a full scholarship to North Texas University for journalism. She took her photography editor with her to Texas North 2 years later when he graduated, but before she could leave, she had a very awkward lunch with her ex-boyfriend and his family, who had hosted them for the day. It was a real challenge for her. She really did not like the guy that much, but she had to get that story. The beach house had been the bomb. When he asked her if they could go out just one more time, she gave him her practiced smile and blinked her eyes. "You're a much better friend to me now than you ever were as a boyfriend." He seemed satisfied or puzzled into silence. She never spoke to him again. The details of the work Texas Tech had done, their amazing technological achievements, setbacks, blood and tears would be published into a book and a riveting documentary that earned the school more than twice as much money as the entire endeavor had cost. The portable foundry they had constructed earned them international fame and enrollment of international students increased each year for 14 consecutive years after the release of the documentary. Texas A&M had allowed every step of their work to be published day by day in their open work environment, and many staff and alumni looked back on this as a mistake. Texas Tech had stolen the show with their aura of mystery, even though they'd lost their own contest. People wouldn't remember that. Instead, they would purchase the movie online and proudly stuff the book about the endeavor into their bookcases, a legacy to be passed down to future generations. The morning when Texas, as a nation, came of age. The victory that Texas A&M had won, their stellar work and achievement, especially in dredging the new channel for the Battleship, would be forgotten. Texas Tech's documentary, Blood and Tears Shed for Lady Lex, would win in the end.